Hello, New Age Christian family. How you doing? Today, we are going to talk about a subject that you may not really consider diving into because it can be a bit dark, pun intended. But today I have Kaylee here with me again, and we just recently did a episode with her on what it is to be a New Age Christian, and it was the previous phone call that we had together, a text I think you sent me, and you said, hey, we should do an episode on the value of darkness, which in most people's worlds, that kind of text message would be like, what? But since we're New Age Christians, we kind of live in the world of oxymorons, and yeah, the value of darkness. So I'm curious, Kaylee. Oh, by the way, you should probably say hello.
Hi, thanks for having me again.
So, why did you send me that text, and what do you mean?
Okay, so I sent this text while I was going through, I don't want to say depression because it wasn't very long. A depressed state of mind is what I'd probably put it at. It's usually for me when my reality doesn't fit my beliefs.
Right.
So I'm living at a lower state of being than I believe I'm at. So, and it really hit me about a couple days into this state of mind that I had had a conversation with Christopher Teasdale, somebody that Austin promises will be on here someday. And he had shared his testimony with me. I don't have time to go into what it was, but it had a lot of hurt and dark times in it. But he had said that it brought him to the person who he was, and that it made him value his life for where it's at now. And so he taught me the value of understanding darkness and how that brings out the positive or the light, if you want. And so for me, when I was in that very upset state, it was really peaceful or peace-bringing to remember that this was a time of growth. This was a time to test my knowledge, test my skills against reality. Hey, I've been saying I believe this. Hey, I've been saying I know this. Now here's a chance for me to live it.
Right. Now you said, and there was a nugget in there right at the very beginning. I'm going to have you unpack it a bit. You said, when my life doesn't reflect my beliefs.
Yes.
That's when you start to feel whatever it was you were feeling, or any versions of that. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Well, something that I know that you've talked about a little bit is that your life is a perfect reflection of what you believe. I know that we talked about that a little bit in our last podcast together. But I've been on this journey for about a year and a half now of unpacking the beliefs that I have, good and negative, and changing the ones that don't agree with my future goals or who I want to be, or being in that state of being, or I amness. And there's multiple ways of doing that, and Belief IQ is definitely a great method and one of the ones I use the most. But in that, I have learned to believe that I am successful and that I'm powerful and that I build healthy, happy relationships, and that I impact people and stuff like that. Whereas in that moment, I was really living in my reality where I just work part-time at Starbucks and I don't see a future for myself there. As great of a company it is, it doesn't fit in with what my dreams are.
Right.
And I was struggling making meaningful relationships with people around me, not because they weren't great or anything, but a lot of beliefs don't line up with theirs. You can only go so deep with somebody that still believes in sin impacting them. Right. Or, the end of the world is coming soon, or stuff like that we're sinners, which is okay. Everyone's at a different place in their journey, but it almost feels like that age gap, or that, where your different experiences sometimes having a hard time getting on the same level.
Sure.
So it wasn't that life was bad. It wasn't reflecting what I knew I could be or what I knew I am.
And so, yeah, and to drill down there just a second, so we're going to be doing different modules on newagechristianity.org where there will be classes that go more in depth to a lot of different things, not the least of which is the creative process in the individual, right? And this creative process of, you mentioned belief IQ, there's other concepts like psyche or emotion code or body code. They're all versions to me of what is known as prayer, this really crazy concept where Jesus says, when you pray, believe that you have what you've asked for and it shall be given to you. And so the whole point of any creative process in humanity is to create what it is that you want and to manifest your creative power as a child of God, as a God that we previously mentioned. Now, if you want to know how that works and all the details, at some point you can take the class. But in just a brief introduction to that concept, if you want to know what you really believe, look at your life. People go, well, I'm not sure what I believe about this, or I'm not sure what I believe about that. That's fine. You don't have to consciously know what you believe about it. Just look at your life, and your life is a perfect reflection back to you. It is the mirror that says, for whatever reason, Kaylee, in this case, you hold a lot of common beliefs of the same people that you work with because you work with them. Their life also reflects employment at Starbucks, right? Now, there might be other beliefs, so non-beliefs aren't necessarily one-to-one. Energetically, you can hold opposing beliefs in the same spot, right? You can hate someone and love someone energetically, but in the physical, you have to manifest one or the other, right? Because physical is inside of time and space, and so your life cannot reflect opposing beliefs. Your life reflects a hierarchy and the ones that you need to fix. But internally, what seems like, well, I believe both of these things are, well, in the end, if you want to know what the real ones are, you look at the physical, because the physical can't overlap. You can't love someone and hate someone. You can't, you can't be married to someone and not married to someone at the same time. You have to pick, and that is why physical is that perfect reflection. And to me, that leads kind of right into one of the two major values of darkness, and that is the value of darkness being a framework for light, right? The other major value for darkness, and we're going to go over both of these in a little bit more detail, is obviously growth, which is what I think mostly what you wanted to talk about, right?
Just a little bit.
So let's start with growth, and then we can get into framing with whatever time we have left. So what are your thoughts on that? What did you want to share?
Oh wow. This is such a vast concept, personally, I think. But I guess the place that I'd like to start is you can just really see that when bad stuff happens, you're living that personal hell, that's when it's the opportunity to either get it together or fail. It's that make or break moment. It's a lot of times for this kind of stuff. Or when the best to see these examples is when you're looking back. Perspective on that.
Right.
There's so many things that, for me, I look back like, for the longest time I was living in this almost state of mind that I was upset with my parents. They are phenomenal people. Austin knows them personally, and they really put so much energy and effort into being good parents, and they really took their roles very seriously. But in any case, in anything, you can always find issues with stuff, and you can always get hurt, and always other stuff like that. So that's very much the case with me. It wasn't so much that they ever intentionally tried to hurt me, or intentionally ever try to do anything. It was more of the unintentional stuff, that growing up with them as my parents, I accidentally learned to believe or stuff like that.
Sure.
Um, but it really hit me during Christmas, actually, right before Christmas, when I had a conversation with my mom on actually how much I valued my childhood, how much I valued them, because it created the person that I am now. That it pushed me to gain different relationships, different perspectives. I always felt stupid, and I felt like my parents unintentionally played into that and never pushed me to go to college or pushed me to pursue more education. But in that, I learned to find people who were living what I wanted to live and follow them and learn from them. So I didn't go that traditional route of going to college, but I found people like Austin that I could be like, hey, tell me your secrets, show me how to live life, give me your time.
Right.
And thankfully this amazing guy was like, okay. And because of that, I really grew and really learned. And for years, I held one area of a very dark part of my childhood in one spot, and now perspective looking at back, I'm going, that's the reason I growed. Grew. That's the reason that I'm where I'm at in my life currently. That's the reason that I know you, and I'm doing this podcast today.
Right.
So I'm very thankful for all of the bad stuff that happened, all that anger, all that frustration, all that darkness that I was in, because it caused me to take a different route, to grow a different way, to find something else that would work when I thought I was trapped.
Right. And that's one of my favorites. Have I ever told you this? We've had so many conversations about the trees in the original biosphere experiment.
Is that the one with the wind?
Yes. So I'm going to tell everyone else, but
okay.
You've heard it. So I believe it's there was Biosphere 1 and Biosphere 2. In Biosphere 2, I believe there might be some historical inaccuracies, but this, even if it's a complete lie, it's a good story. So that one of the lessons they learned from Biosphere 1 is that they had these fruit trees, large fruit trees in the biosphere, and as they got more and more mature and they began to bear fruit, they found that the trees started falling over. And they couldn't figure out why, once they got fruit, why would the trees fall over? And what they realized was that inside the biosphere there was no wind, and that the trees actually get stronger and become more stable by actually having adversity, having the wind that they have to stand against. And so there's a few amazing analogies about how that all works, but another one of my favorite current communicators, Kerwin Ray, he did a quick little 5-minute Facebook live thing where he had a moment of insight that he was sharing with some people, and it was essentially the value of darkness. And he used the example of being overwhelmed. He's like he talked about, when you're overwhelmed, realize if you can switch your mind, and instead of letting it kill you, if you can realize, wow, this is a good moment for me, that you realize you're hitting the edges of your capacity as an individual, and you are essentially, and that's where he came up with this that where he mentioned like the rubber band, like your capacity as an individual, you stretch and you hit the edges of who you are, and then there's always a little bit of a spring back, right? Yes, the spring back. So you become something new, and you become something more, and you've stretched. You hit your edges, you hit your overwhelm, and then boom, you break into something that you wish you had been the whole time. And then there's what happens after that. And I'd like some of your stories on some of that if you're willing to share them, Kaylee.
Oh, sure. It was funny. We were just having a conversation, just like 2 days ago when we went and saw a movie.
Mm-hmm.
We were hanging out, and I ended up having two separate, for instances, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, where I can give one specifically where my husband, who for me I think is one of the most intelligent men I've ever met, and his insight on business and people is just incredible. If you ever have a chance to sit down and talk to him about it, highly suggest you do. He will blow your mind.
We love you, Ron.
And I can only say that because I've had my mind blown by Austin. So it truly lives up to the hype of blowing your mind.
The definition.
But my husband was encouraging me, and I'm not much of a words of affirmation person, but he was just affirming me with his words, and he ended up telling me that I was the smartest person he ever met or ever known, and it truly meant the world to me because for so many years I struggled with believing in myself in any kind of intelligent way. I thought it was stupid, so I lived my life that way. So being on this journey and working on beliefs and different stuff, I had seen a lot of progress in believing in myself. But when he said it, the person in the world that I value most, being my husband, it took me to my all-time high, like emotionally, like I've never felt so high.
Mm-hmm.
And then that very night I had a nightmare that brought me to my very lowest, where it was going back to school, and it was a dream about a couple family members and a couple people that were like family from my childhood, all of phenomenal people, but in this role they were taking me down. They were intentionally making sure I failed. They were intentionally in my dream doing this to me, and I woke up feeling the most inadequate I had ever felt. And I'm like, how is it that I go from one high to the lowest I've ever been? And then when Austin was talking about that bounce back, I was like, I just hit my highest. So it took me down to my lowest. But if I'm really being real with myself, I like to say the lowest I've ever been. But is that actually the lowest I've ever been? Because I had the feeling of inadequacy, and I felt it very strongly, but it wasn't the place that I used to believe that.
Right.
Because there was a very long period of my life where I lived in that state. So now I just got brought back to the feelings and the frustrations of it, but it wasn't the lowest I've ever been. So if that's my new low, that's incredible. But
right.
Now having that perspective, thankfully Austin enlightened me with the rubber band effect, because I did go from a very high to this very extreme low in a less than a 24-hour period, and it was very frustrating going. I just felt like I could take on the world to, I'm not sure if I want to get out of the bed of the morning. Like, Starbucks now seems way too difficult to deal with.
One interesting thing and you've largely been someone that's really drawn my attention to this truth, and that is when you do the work to change who you are, you're becoming a different person. And so when you, especially if you're doing things like Psych-K or Belief IQ or Emotion Code, where you're doing literally energetic changes on a spirit soul level, you wake up, you've lived for however many years as somebody who believed these things and carried a frequency and a vibration of these things, and then if you do certain mechanisms like those that can literally change you in 5 minutes, right? You do enough of that, you do enough of that work all at once, where you're doing 3 or 4 sessions a week and you're just cranking through life change and life change and life change and life change, and then you stop, right? And it's like you look in the mirror and you don't even know who you are, because you are such a different person so fast, that I believe one of the reasons that rubber band effect is even more exacerbated by in this kind of life is because those stretches are so far so fast that when you do bounce back and you do have that moment, it's so much energy that's now just gone, and it's now just missing, that all you have is the memory of what it was, right? And that memory without the supporting energy is this weird amalgamation of, it's super strong and super painful, yet at the same time it has no basis. And so there's almost like this added element of like, why do I feel this? I shouldn't feel this. It's like it doesn't make sense anymore. Before, when you felt like crap and it's who you were, you're like, well, I know why I feel this because I'm X, Y, and Z. And now you're like, well, I feel like crap, but don't I don't feel like I'm that person. And it makes it this really like, what is going on right now? Is that just me?
No, I
Yeah.
totally get it. I know just like a week or two ago, I did my language says balance, but I realigned a belief, so I took a negative and I turned it to a positive using belief IQ. Um, I know you have a specific language for it. I'm not catching it on.
It's
I'm
all
trying. And like I felt it instantaneously. I was bawling. Like it was the most just like life changing. And I remember telling my husband because he was there, and of course I'm bawling, so he's trying to like help. And I was like, Ron, I don't know how to live life. I don't know who I am now. Like I just changed something that it was a simple change in like if you look at the energy it took to do, like it took a while, but like it probably only took like 10-15 minutes, and I just completely rocked my own world. Like to the point where I'm like, I don't even know how I feel about things anymore. I know, like I was recently telling you that like something I had been okay with not having for 20 something years of my life, I'm all of a sudden not okay with it. And so that's an area now I can look into, all because I went and messed with one area of belief.
Right. Well, it's the pruning concept, right? So, we think, okay, so trees do best when they're pruned and taken care of, especially fruit trees. But the first step is removing an entire freaking branch, right? And you're like, I hope that grows back next year, Like, I have fruit trees, and then like every year I'm like, I don't want to cut these. Like it's like so counterintuitive to no, become bigger and better, and yet you realize there has to be this moment, and it's almost like reverse rubber band, where it's like, okay, we're just going to lop this off, and then it's going to bounce back. It's changing who you are on an energetic level, on a belief level, and an emotional level. That's how you make natural change, and that growth process is so incredibly personalized, right? And it's seasons, and what it is that you're going through, that it can carry a lot of darkness in those moments. It can carry so much darkness in it. And at the end of the podcast, we have kind of a major point we want to encourage you to adopt as a view of life. But in the meantime, if you can start to understand the role of darkness a bit, then there is a perspective that you can have about it that we believe it exponentially speeds up your growth process.
Oh, most certainly.
Like your story, like you can sit there and wallow in it, or you can turn around and go, wait, what do I do?
Let's do a podcast on darkness. Let's make this better.
The other piece of darkness is, and I mentioned earlier, is kind of the value. So it can help you grow, right? Mm-hmm. Pruning, fire, refiners, fire, the wind in the biosphere. Those different analogies. Clearly, darkness holds value for journey, and it's interesting if you're one of those people that like tries to avoid pain. Man, I would just encourage you to reconsider the value of that pain, and we'll unpack it a bit, but I keep alluding towards the overall point, and it's a good one. So
why don't you just do you want to do perspective, and then we can give them the overall point.
Yeah. So perspective. The other value of darkness is to give you perspective on a very natural level. Clearly, it's I wouldn't know what a loving relationship was if I didn't have experience with non-loving relationships, or I wouldn't know what feeling good was if I didn't know what feeling bad was. And I actually spent quite a bit of time with a community of people that did not believe you needed darkness to frame light. It's the yin and the yang, and it comes from a well-meaning kind of spiritual religious idea that darkness is all evil and darkness is all bad and that darkness eventually will be destroyed. Okay. And to that end, if you go a bit more philosophical, tonight, after you're done listening to this podcast tonight, go outside and look up at the stars and realize that if darkness wasn't the predominant color, if that's a color,
shade.
If darkness wasn't the predominant essence that you were seeing in the sky, you would have no clue where the stars were, where each star is literally framed by darkness. And so that the light that is there actually only has context in the fact that it's surrounded by a lack of light. And this is true philosophically, and yes, that's this nice picture of the stars, but it is absolutely true in life if you will allow yourself to view it differently. For me, the value, so I did an episode on Jesus, and I don't know if I mentioned in that episode that I have a yin and yang necklace.
You did. I just listened to it today. So.
Nice. So I mentioned, okay, so I have a yin and yang necklace, and it has become my version of wearing a cross around my neck.
Are you wearing it right now?
Actually, I'm not. I went and got a haircut and I took it off. It is my version of wearing a cross around my necklace because the yin and yang to me is Jesus. Because Jesus is logic. And we cannot experience heaven properly if there is no perspective of it. To experience an amazing relationship with your parents, we've all met those people that, like, you know, people with a silver spoon in their mouth, right? Who have never had to work a day in their life, and who have no clue what hard work is or anything like that. The reason they don't is because it hasn't been framed for them, right? They have only the quote unquote good, and in a way, what happens when a silver spoon person ends up having to they don't get their favorite sports car for their birthday. Literally, the slightest little bit of darkness that shows up, suddenly it's this overwhelming, and you get that spoiled tantrum, or this is maybe a very bad example, but people who live in this amazingly beautiful state in their health, right? And all of a sudden they get a splinter, and it's like this earth-shattering moment. And yet you look at those other people that literally have the one guy who's got no arms and no legs and is like traveling the world as a motivational speaker.
I guess the other perspective that I have seen is a lot of people who've gone through, hell and become addicted to like drugs or marijuana or like pain numbers. Mm-hmm. And I understand that there's times that you want to numb the pain, and I'm not trying to condemn anyone, but because of that, they're stunting their emotional growth. They're stunting we know a lot of people who have, to lack of a nicer word, potheads. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a lot of times where you're like, well, they're great, but it's kind of sometimes like talking to a child. Mm-hmm. You're having to explain concepts over and simpler, and it's not because they're lacking intelligence or anything's wrong with them. It's just that they've got so used to dulling it and not being able to deal with darkness that they can't get through a day without help. Right. Same with alcohol and mm-hmm. other stuff.
Often cigarettes. People need that hit to kind of stay up instead. And
it's not that we're trying to condemn someone or anything like that, because everybody has their thing, or had their thing. I know for a long time in my life, my escape was like movies and stories and anything I could to stop facing my own reality and find a new one to enjoy for a short period of time and get a high from that. But in that, you miss an opportunity to grow. you miss an opportunity to learn. And a lot of people don't realize that if you take that moment and feel the pain and let the darkness actually teach you something, that the next time that happens again, it's not going to hurt the same way. Mm-hmm. You're actually learning from it, you're growing from it, and it just doesn't hit you the same way. You've already experienced it, so the next time it comes to you, you're going, well, I know how to deal with this. It's not putting me out of my comfort zone. It's not hurting me the same way. I know how to deal with the situation. For me, it would be like the first time being yelled at a customer, like, you're mm-hmm. in that customer service, the first time being yelled at, how you react and how you're like terrified and traumatized, versus like the 7th time, the 12th time, the 13th time. You're like, oh, I got this. Like, you're upset, I can deal with this. I can diffuse the situation before it even escalates. Mm-hmm. Like, I know how to handle this because I've learned and grown from that first time where I pretty much like deer in the headlights. Now I'm going, hey, you're having a problem? I will not only help you, I will like stop what I'm doing, save my coworker, and like get the situation handled.
Right. Now that is a specified example of the first time you dealt with that quote unquote, let's call it darkness, right? The angry customer is right. Darkness, right?
Very.
And the first time you did, it was this earth shattering, right? And then you get used to it. Now, going up to the highest level, and I want to get to this quote unquote end point so that we can unpack it a bit. What if you viewed darkness itself as being a good thing? Like, what if you became just like you became an expert in dealing with angry customers, because it was just a part. What if you just became an expert in dealing with darkness in general? Like, what if you became capable of, the moment something shows up, you don't let it destroy you. You actually view it, and you've become the type of person that looks at that as an opportunity, looks at that and goes, oh yes, a crappy day, here we go,
I mean, I thankfully have had people who've given me this perspective a little while ago, so I've been able to mm-hmm. Live the last year or so, I would say, in understanding the value of darkness and what it can do. So I know that there's been a few times where like when I told you that I had that earth-shattering balance or that life-change belief I did recently, one of the first things almost immediately after, so pretty much once I calmed down, I had this immediate feeling that I needed to like video message a friend of mine that I care about very deeply, and it was like this immediate spirit, so I just did it, and I'm sure I still had tears in my eyes and I looked like a blubbering mess, but I let them know what had just happened in my life, and first of all, no idea how it's going to impact me, no idea what I was going to do with it, mm-hmm. but just what had happened and why it hit me so hard. And it took probably 4 or something days, but that person messaged me back and said, thank you for sending me that because now I'm realizing that area also holds some of the same hooks as it did for you. So it wasn't like, I mean, it didn't so much make that moment easier, but looking back going, that moment some ways tore me apart, but knowing what I know and different stuff, I was able to take the very next moment after that to share what I just went through and encourage somebody else.
Yeah.
Not that I really necessarily want to go do that again.
But at the same, it's not like we're searching out darkness, right?
No, I'm not looking for trouble.
You don't want tomorrow to be shitty. You just don't. But like, what if, so a lot of people say hindsight's 20/20, right? And you look back and you go, I'm so thankful for my upbringing. It taught me this. Great. That's beautiful. If you're going to, like, you should start there. If you've never looked back at the darkness and the crappy times, and you've never found a reason to be thankful for it. By the way, that was, who was it? I don't know if it was Sadhguru or somebody, some similar teacher actually talked about how the true definition, or you've truly forgiven somebody, is when you can be thankful for everything they did to you. Like actually, that you've actually forgiven them. On the other side of forgiveness is thankfulness. And thankfulness for what they did to you. Anyways, so yes, doing that and becoming the type of person that can look back and have that hindsight and go, that was amazing. But how much more powerful do you become when you, in the middle of it, you don't need perspective or hindsight. You have a perspective on darkness and its role in your life that says, I've got, this is an opportunity. And I've already said this, but it is, I was talking to Joni, my wife, it must have been a few days ago, and there's a quote that she found from Marcus Aurelius that, I'm going to butcher the quote, but it was basically along the lines of, if you think you're in hell, you will, no, if you believe you're in hell, or you think you're in hell, you will believe in your hell, and if you believe you're in hell, you will be in hell. Versus, if you don't think you're in hell, then you won't believe you're in hell, and if you don't believe you're in hell, then you won't be in hell. And it's also the same, if you've seen that meme with the donkey that's tied to a plastic chair, like, and it's like sometimes it's all in your head. This is huge. Actually it's a mule, so it's a much larger than a donkey, and it's tied to a plastic chair, and it's not moving, or the cat that's inside a cage with no top.
Oh well, you know that with elephants that they put them to little posts in the ground just by a string. A mighty elephant, just because they've trained them since a child, that can keep them there. And so by the time they're an adult, they view that little peg in the ground tied to that string as the thing keeping them from freedom.
Wow.
When it's just because they've been trained since a child that this is what's keeping them down.
Now, we all look at those things, and this is the same thing with hero stories. Like those are amazing examples of the mind, right? And we all look at heroes and we go, what does it look like to, if you're, Gladiator and you're talking about Maximus, or you're talking about Braveheart, and you're talking about all these different, I'm going to list man stories, but there's other stories, right? Point being, is we look at them and they go, man, or Lincoln, let's use a real one, okay. Abraham Lincoln. People look back and they go, that dude was an amazing president. He did X, Y, and Z, and he largely kept the United States the United States. Yet, in the midst of it, they hated him so much they assassinated him, right? In the midst of it, he lost so many, I don't remember how many, he lost all of these elections, and
every single one, I think.
Yeah, I don't think he won a single election until he ran for president.
And the only reason he won is because his opposing candidate was so much worse than him.
Right? And so, we look at Abraham Lincoln and go, oh, he's one of the greatest U.S. presidents ever. Here's the thing. In the midst of being Abraham Lincoln, he has to have perspectives on life. He has to learn ways of looking at life to where he gets to be Abraham Lincoln when nobody else knows who the crap Abraham Lincoln even is. Right? And we look at heroes and we look at the things they did and we go, oh man, they were amazing. But I can promise you, they didn't become amazing at the end. They became amazing long before the sequence of events that made them a hero ever began. And how do you become amazing? Well, it is absolutely your outlook on life, right? Another story my wife was telling me that she was reading through was Thomas Edison. And when the Edison labs burned down, right? Equivalent to potentially hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment and inventions and chemicals and obviously the building itself and the real estate. And when it started to burn down, he told his son to go get all of his friends because they're never going to see a fire that looks like this again because of all the colors of the chemicals and everything, right? And in it, and we've all heard this famous quote about inventing the light bulb, and the 999 failures. And he said, no, I haven't failed 999 times. I've successfully found 999 ways not to do it. But even when his lab burned down, people are like, "What are you going to do?" And he said, "Well, this is great. We get to start all. We get fresh ideas to start all over. Like we don't have to, because you walk into an office and you've got all these inventions you're working on, and you're kind of locked into where you're at. When it all burns up, you get a fresh new start. You get to reinvent Edison Labs from the ground up, and that's how he viewed it. Now, how do you become that type of person who, while your business, while your identity, while your income is burning to the ground, you're literally saying, "What an opportunity," right? You have to become that type of person requires an intentionality of not just learning lessons, but it's learning how to learn lessons.
Is that?
And that's where I think, Kaylee, you've done your insights on the mechanisms of how these lessons are learned and how we become the people we become are largely what, for the NAC family. I'm excited for them to get to know you more and more, because yeah, I can teach a lot of people the lessons,
Anything.
but how to become the type of person to learn how to learn, if that makes sense. I think that made sense. I'll have to play it back.
I think what you're saying is, for me, like when you're asking, it's like, how does a person take an opportunity that would have taken them to the ground initially? How do they take that as okay, now that I'm on the ground defeated, how do I get up and change? How do I take this moment? And for me, a lot of it has really started with the looking back. The perspective has been everything. That's where I'd start if I was you, but I'm not. So go with what's best for you. But find those areas in your life that, in some ways, are the worst, and find anything that could have possibly came out of it that made you better, made something else better. I know for me, like a heartbreak, then really brought about, a lot of self-searching and different stuff. And then when I met my husband, like a year and so later, it was like I was ready, because I had already kind of had this heartache and understanding, and I knew what I was looking for. So I wasn't going to play games. And I had unintentionally taught myself, I don't want this particular pain again, but I'm not going to give up the opportunity to spend my life with somebody. So what am I going to do instead? So yes, I was trying to avoid the pain, but I was doing that by learning.
Right.
Because that's a lot of it is, even if your motivation right now is not to get hurt, take the darkness as a way to teach you how to do life better, so those situations don't hurt you. Now, life will always throw something at you, but the more you learn, the more opportunities you do grab, the more darkness you let be opportunities for you, it's not going to seem so daunting. So even when you're in that state of mind of, this sucks, this is awful, you can kind of go, oh, wait a second, I bet something really good is going to come out of this. And I know there's been a few times that even Austin, you've told me, like, life really sucks right now. Like, I know the payoff is going to be good, but this sucks.
Well, it's for the joy set before him, Jesus endured the cross.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It's the suckiest moment, clearly, in his life. And according to the Bible, he was happy about it. Right? And
I've always kind of wondered what kind of maniac was happy about going to cross.
Well, and I mean, clearly, he had gotten to the point, I believe that's what the Garden of Gethsemane was about, there was no doubt whether or not he was going to obey God. Right? He'd already told Judas to leave. He told the disciples for years that he was going to die. So obedience was never the question for Jesus. It was where did he stand about it with his desire and his want and his it wasn't just, oh, I'm willing to do it from obedience, because obedience was an old covenant mindset, and obedience does not please God. It's faith that pleases God. It's the creative capacity inside of us. So when you go through that crap unwillingly, and you're like, okay, God, I'll begrudgingly drag through this bull so that I guess I can have something worth it on the other side, right? Well, have fun with that. You know, it kind of works, but not really, because I guarantee you're missing a whole lot of lessons, and you're making your entire journey miserable along the way. Or you can align yourself with what is happening and embrace it and bring it into you and bring it in and realize, no, I don't want my life to be this forever. Whether it's disease or relational problems or financial problems or whatever, if you can embrace that darkness and have a perspective that begins to realize that it is valuable, that it is framing everything you do want, right? You know, talk about holding two energies in the same place. You know, a lot of us want to be financially free, and yet at the same time, if you really dig down, you have a lot of identity issues around not being financially free, right? We develop habits and we develop patterns in our lives to manage our current I amness, and yet we want to change them all. And then when change shows up, we think it's darkness. You know?
And that's one of the things that I always find frustrating, I guess, is that a lot of people do want change, and a lot of people do want it, and they'll pray for change, and they'll ask God to send them change, and when it comes, they flip their lids. I know that like for me, like a lot of people will say something like, that's not the person I married, or different stuff, and I'm like, of course they've changed. Like, change is always inevitable, so what are you going to do with it? Like, I know there's many times, like in places of business, well, they'll change stuff, or hey, something as simple as Facebook will change their platform, and people lose it.
Yep.
But if you give like a person who's level-headed a week or so, they're like, oh, this makes sense. Like, this is great. Like, you can do this and this, and this is, convenient.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll find the stuff in it that is of value. But when you're looking at it as change is hard, I'm not saying change is easy, but if you look at it as change is of value to me, change is of value to my life, in the long run, it will be for my benefit always. Life happens for me, not to me.
I love that one.
I know you do. That's why I said it. And if you can get a value for it, give it time, and that value will grow into appreciation, and then you'll find a joy to it. Not happiness, a joy to it.
Yeah, it's a lower, steadier. It's a less, woohoo energy, and it's more like, I got this.
It's the people that really push through working out to the point where they can enjoy actually working out because they know what will come after.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't been one of those particular people, but there are stuff like that. It's like I've got through snowboarding, falling on my butt over and over and over again, and the pain. Now I'm on the other side where I love it. It's fun. There's not as much pain. I might fall once in a while, but
right.
There's that learning curve that the initial learning hurt, but the payoff is so worth it.
So that is kind of our little chat on darkness, the value of it. Hopefully, the major takeaway, it's a bit difficult to really understand the difference between valuing darkness and as a looking back versus in the midst of it becoming the kind of person that values it, where you become like Abraham Lincoln before we all knew who he was. Where you become like Edison before we all knew. You have to become the type of person who can be a hero. And I think New Age Christianity is largely a community of people who value change and want to change. And yet, all of us, there's certain things we're like, I wish I was richer or healthier or skinnier or had all this. I've built a comfortable life and I just don't want to make any changes. So if the money could show up without changing anything else, that would be awesome. Look,
Good luck.
Yeah, right. It's I want all the change. It's one of my favorite memes, where it's like It's the guy with it's just a little hand drawn meme where it's like one dude and then a bunch of people in a crowd. And he's like, "What do we want?" And then it's like freedom. Who's going to give it to us? The government. What do we not understand? Freedom. Like, what do I want? Change. How am I going to get it? Nothing. Doing nothing. What do I not understand? Change. That change requires change, and there in that is a lot of potential perceived darkness.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can embrace it, and if you can become the type of person who uses that on purpose, to grow and mature on purpose, you have any parting words? Farting words? Oh my gosh, that is the Freudian slip of the podcast so far. Oh my gosh. Perfect ending right there.
Well, what can I leave after that? Your parting words were perfection.
Well, with that said, we hope this episode has made you laugh and blessed you a bit, and hopefully is a challenge.
You away.
Yeah, challenged you a bit on your challenged you a bit on your perspective of hard times in life and darkness. As always, we appreciate your time, and we know you take time out of your life to listen to this, and we are honored to have you with us. Love you guys, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.
Bye.